The day D-Day began. What soldiers saw on the beaches. June 6, 1944. Before sunrise, thousands of Allied soldiers were moving across the English Channel. They were heading toward the coast of Normandy, France. Many of them had never seen the beaches they were about to land on. They knew only that one of the largest military operations in history was beginning. Ahead of them were German defensive positions, mines, artillery, machine guns, and obstacles built along the coastline. Behind them was the largest invasion fleet many had ever seen. The operation would become known as D-Day. It was the beginning of the Allied invasion of Nazi-occupied Western Europe. For years, Germany had controlled much of continental Europe. France had been occupied since 1940. The Atlantic Wall had been constructed along the coast to prevent an Allied invasion. Concrete bunkers, artillery positions, machine gun nests, and obstacles were placed along strategic sections of the coastline. The Germans knew an invasion was coming. What they did not know was exactly where or when it would happen. The Allies spent months preparing for the invasion. Soldiers trained repeatedly. Engineers developed special equipment. Aircraft crews practiced bombing missions. Naval forces prepared to support the landings. Thousands of ships and landing craft were assembled. The scale of the operation was enormous. But no amount of preparation could tell a soldier exactly what he would see when the landing ramp opened. In the early hours of June 6th, Allied aircraft crossed the French coastline. Paratroopers were dropped behind German lines. Their mission was to capture bridges, disrupt communications, and prevent German forces from moving quickly toward the beaches. The airborne landings were chaotic. Some soldiers landed far from their intended locations. Others became separated from their units. Some landed in fields surrounded by German forces. Yet many continued toward their objectives. At sea, the invasion fleet moved closer to Normandy. Thousands of soldiers waited inside cramped landing craft. Some were silent. Some prayed. Others tried to talk with the men around them. The sea was rough. Many soldiers became seasick. The landing craft moved through darkness toward the French coast. For some men, the wait was almost worse than the fighting. They knew that when the ramp opened, they would have to leave the boat and move toward the beach. They could not turn back. At approximately 6:30 in the morning, the first major American landings began at Omaha and Utah Beaches. British and Canadian forces landed farther east at Gold, Juno, and Sword beaches. Each beach presented different challenges. Omaha became one of the most heavily defended landing areas. German positions were located on cliffs and elevated ground overlooking the beach. Machine guns could fire down toward approaching soldiers. Artillery positions were nearby. The beach itself was wide and exposed. When the first landing craft approached Omaha, the soldiers could see smoke rising from the coastline. Some could see explosions. Others could see German defensive positions. The landing craft continued forward. There was no easy way to escape. Then the ramps began to drop. The soldiers moved out. For many, the first seconds were confusing. The water was deeper than expected in some areas. Equipment became heavy. Weapons and ammunition had to be kept above the water. Men tried to move forward while avoiding obstacles. Some landing craft were hit before reaching the beach. Others became stuck. The carefully planned operation immediately became a struggle against the environment and enemy fire. The soldiers had to move. Remaining in the open water was dangerous. The beach offered little protection. Some men searched for natural cover. Others moved toward the seawall. Engineers attempted to clear obstacles and create paths for vehicles. The noise was enormous. Naval guns fired from offshore. Aircraft attacked German positions. Artillery shells exploded. Machine guns fired from defensive positions. Smoke covered sections of the beach. Orders were difficult to hear. Units became mixed together. Officers were separated from their men. The original plans began changing within minutes. This is one of the defining characteristics of combat. Plans created months earlier can collapse in seconds. Soldiers must then make decisions with incomplete information. On Omaha Beach, Some units were unable to advance as quickly as expected. German defenses remained strong, but the Allied soldiers continued moving. Small groups began finding gaps in the defenses. Engineers worked to clear obstacles. Rangers and infantrymen climbed the heights overlooking the beach. Their objective was to reach German positions and open routes inland. The fighting was intense. But the invasion was not decided on one beach alone. Across Normandy, Allied forces were making progress. At Utah Beach, American troops faced different conditions. The landing area was separated by flooded fields and defensive positions. Despite confusion, many units advanced inland. British and Canadian troops also moved forward from their landing beaches. Their objectives included capturing towns, roads, bridges, and airfields. The German response was complicated. Some German commanders understood that the invasion was serious. But Allied deception operations had convinced German leadership that the main invasion might come somewhere else. This deception was critical. The Allies had created false information suggesting that another invasion would take place near Calais. As a result, important German forces were held away from Normandy. This delay gave the Allied armies time to establish themselves. But the battle was far from over. Landing on the beaches was only the beginning. The Allies needed to move inland. They had to bring supplies, vehicles, ammunition, and reinforcements ashore. They had to capture roads and towns. They had to break through German defensive positions. And they had to hold the beaches against counterattacks. The soldiers who landed on June 6th were therefore fighting for more than a strip of coastline. They were fighting for the ability to build a new front in Western Europe. Behind the beaches, Normandy was filled with difficult terrain. Hedgerows divided fields into small enclosed areas. These hedgerows were much harder to cross than many Allied planners had expected. German troops could use them as defensive positions. Every advance became difficult. The countryside looked peaceful. But behind walls of vegetation, soldiers could be waiting. The first days after D-Day were therefore extremely dangerous. The Allies had established a foothold. But they had not yet won Normandy. Reinforcements continued arriving. Thousands of vehicles were unloaded. Supplies moved inland. Medical units treated wounded soldiers. Engineers repaired roads and built temporary infrastructure. The famous artificial harbors known as mulberries helped move enormous amounts of supplies across the English Channel. The invasion became a massive logistical operation. It was not only about soldiers. Fuel was needed. Food was needed. Ammunition was needed. Vehicles required spare parts. Medical supplies had to reach the front. Without this system, the invasion could not continue. For the soldiers on the beaches, however, none of this changed the immediate reality. They were still facing German defenses. They were still exposed to artillery. They were still trying to locate their units. Many had no idea how successful the overall invasion was. A soldier on Omaha Beach could not see what was happening at Utah. A Canadian soldier at Juno could not know how the American airborne landings were progressing. Each man experienced only a small part of the enormous operation. That is important when understanding D-Day. History remembers the invasion as one event. But for the soldiers who participated, it was thousands of separate experiences. One soldier remembered the landing craft. Another remembered the water. Another remembered a friend disappearing in the confusion. Another remembered reaching the seawall. Another remembered climbing a cliff. Another remembered finally finding his unit. Another remembered the first quiet moment after leaving the beach. These personal experiences made D-Day real. The invasion involved more than 150,000 Allied troops on the first day. Thousands of aircraft supported the operation. Thousands of ships and landing craft were involved. It was one of the largest amphibious operations ever attempted. But the numbers do not fully explain what it meant. Imagine standing inside a landing craft with dozens of other soldiers. You know that somewhere ahead are enemy defenses. You hear artillery. You feel the boat moving through rough water. Your equipment is heavy. You cannot see exactly what is happening outside. Then the ramp opens. You step into the water. The beach is ahead. There is nowhere to hide. For many soldiers, this was their first experience of large-scale combat. Some were teenagers. Others were older veterans. Some had already fought in North Africa or Italy. Others had never seen combat before. They all faced the same coastline. The invasion continued throughout the day. By nightfall, the Allies had established positions along the Normandy coast. The beaches were still dangerous. The fighting continued inland. But the most important thing had happened. The Allies had gained a foothold in Western Europe. The German occupation of France was now directly threatened. Over the following weeks, Allied forces expanded their positions. The Battle of Normandy became a major campaign. German forces fought hard to stop the advance. The Allies suffered heavy casualties. But reinforcements and supplies continued arriving. Eventually, Allied forces broke out of Normandy. Paris would later be liberated. The Allied armies continued moving east toward Germany. Less than a year later, Nazi Germany would surrender. D-Day did not win the entire war in one morning. But it opened a new front that placed enormous pressure on Germany. It allowed the Western Allies to fight directly in occupied France. It also demonstrated the enormous military and industrial resources assembled by the Allies. The soldiers who landed on June 6th could not know the future. They did not know that their landing would become legendary. They did not know how historians would describe the day. They only knew that they had to move forward. Some survived the beach and continued fighting for weeks. Some were wounded. Some were killed before reaching the shore. Some returned home years later. Others never returned. Today, the beaches of Normandy are peaceful. Visitors walk along the coastline. Memorials stand where soldiers once fought. The water looks calm. Grass grows over positions that once held guns. But beneath that peaceful landscape is a history of extraordinary sacrifice. D-Day is remembered as a victory, but it was also a day of fear, a day of confusion, a day when ordinary soldiers were asked to do something extraordinary. They crossed the English Channel. They entered enemy territory. They climbed beaches under fire. They moved forward despite uncertainty. And they helped create the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. The invasion of Normandy changed the course of World War II. But its true meaning can only be understood by remembering the people who stood on those beaches. They were not just numbers in a military report. They were sons, brothers, fathers, friends. Young men with lives waiting for them. On June 6, 1944, they stepped onto the beaches of Normandy. Some came home. Many did not. And the world they helped save would never forget what happened there.